So I have just finished the finale of Obi-Wan Kenobi, and I'll be honest, I've been very critical of this show. But I'm surprised at how well I feel they've managed to wrap up the story arcs and conclude everything in a satisfying way, I guess. I enjoyed the episode. I think aside from episode 1, this was the best episode in the series. It had some of the most powerful character moments. It did nostalgia in a way that worked, rather than it being too on the nose. And to be honest with you, after the complete and utter disappointment that was the finale of the Book of Boba Fett, it really couldn't have got any worse, and I think this show ended things well, which was a nice change of pace. Anyway, there are spoilers ahead, so you have been warned. So the episode starts a bit rough, mainly because, again, it's a pacing issue with the storytelling itself. In the previous episode, Reva was left pretty much dead and buried on Jabim, and then all of a sudden she's just on Tatooine finding Owen. But then this scene cuts to the Star Destroyer and the Transporter, which are in a chase. Reva somehow manages to overcome her wounds and get all the way to Tatooine and find Luke in a very abrupt time period that doesn't correlate with other events in the episode. Again, pacing issues has been a common reoccurrence in this show, and it still is, and the pacing with Reva's whole character arc as well is still a problem for me, but we'll get to her later. I thought the chase sequence with the Star Destroyer was a lot of fun. I enjoyed it. It was small, but it was clearly a callback to A New Hope, especially in the way that they shot it. And I think the effects looked good, which was a nice change from some of the effects in previous episodes. We then have some small dialogue moments and good character moments between Obi-Wan and Leia. Again, I've been a supporter of the relationship between these two characters in the whole show. I think it's probably been the highlight of the whole thing, and this episode continues that well. However, I don't think enough was done with the rebels. This character, Roken, I think his name is, the rebel leader, he's uninteresting, and I don't care about him simply on the basis that the show doesn't give you a reason to care about him, and I actually think this is a mistake in terms of the story. I think that Tala in the last episode should have taken Roken's place as the leader of the rebel group, and it should have been Roken that died in that kind of abrupt, unemotional moment that Tala did in the previous episode. Tala was given a lot of character development throughout the 3 episodes that she was in. It focused on her quite a lot, and I think it would have given us more reason to care about this rebel group if Tala was the one that ultimately led it beyond Obi-Wan, and that way you also have a brand new, interesting character that was once an Imperial officer that defected, and more could have been done with it. But hey, I'm not a professional writer, so what do I know? We then switch over to Owen and Beru getting prepared to lay down their lives to protect Luke from Reva, and it was nice to see Bonnie P.S. again as Beru, and I actually enjoyed this little sequence. They're arguing about what length they're going to have to go to protect Luke, and that they couldn't rely on Obi-Wan was, I think, the right thing to do, and I actually kind of like how Beru is the one who takes charge. It was nice to see that fierce, protective mother vibe from her. And I think this moment actually does a really good job of adding some depth to the characters of Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru. This specific moment shows us that they were willing to fight a Jedi hunter to protect their child, essentially. And it makes you think maybe that these two, even in their old age, put up the same kind of fight when they fought against whoever killed them in A New Hope. And it just gives you a little bit more respect for these two characters in the grander story of Star Wars. We then switch back and Obi-Wan leaves the ship in an escape pod or something, which completely diverts Darth Vader's attention to the disgust of the Grand Inquisitor, and they then land on this interesting looking planet. I'm not sure what planet it was, but if any of you are Knights of the Old Republic fans, this planet really gave me Malachor vibes, but without the green kind of glow. And truthfully, I'm happy that it wasn't another desert planet. It was visually different, although it was a little bit plain and dark. I think this allowed for the colour vibrancy in the actual battle with the lightsabers to pop out a little bit more. Obi-Wan and Vader then meet, and then a battle ensues. Now, I really enjoyed this whole battle. I thought the choreography was good, it was well executed, and I just enjoyed the amplified nature of the Force and the battle in general that was shown here. This felt like the right time in the story to finally have Obi-Wan reconnect with himself, unlike earlier, as he had gone through the necessary steps to get back to this point and to reconnect with the general he used to be, and I think it was done right. However, I still think the usage of shaky cam in this show made it look a bit too fan-filmy where it wasn't, and I also feel like the pacing was off here, because during the battle between Obi-Wan and Vader, there was constant cuts between this scenario and another scenario on Tatooine where Reva is attacking Owen and Beru. I think it would have been much healthier for the pacing just to focus on the battle between Obi-Wan and Vader, have that conclude, then have the sequence with Reva. It also would have allowed the actual story to fit a little bit better in terms of time spans. I mentioned a little bit earlier, but the timings of things just seemed messed up. They're not in sync with one another, and it's a nitpick, but it's also kinda glaring. Reva manages to go all the way to Tatooine, then hunt Luke, all in the same time that it took this Star Destroyer to shoot the transporter a few times. And while it doesn't necessarily do anything to ruin anything, it's still something you notice, but it's not the only time in this episode where I feel like this has been a problem, but I'll talk about that a bit later. The battle between Darth Vader and Obi-Wan is continuing, and Vader overcomes Obi-Wan again, and essentially buries him alive. There's a nice little shot here where Darth Vader has the high ground, a little on the nose, but I liked it. And then we see Obi-Wan is actually creating like a protective barrier around himself with the Force, and he's essentially having his anime protagonist moment where he sees Leia and Luke, and he's hearing the voice of Anakin, and he knows he can't fail them the way he feels he failed Anakin, and so he blasts the rocks, and then he jumps back out, and the battle continues. And again, the whole battle from beginning to end I think is done well. It's really fun to watch, and is it as good as the prequels? I don't think so, but I think we were generally spoiled with how entertaining the prequels' lightsaber combat was in terms of pure action, and I think what this tries to do is balance that with a little bit of the slower-paced dueling of the originals, and I think they get that balance right. Anyway, we then cut back to Reva again, and as much as Owen and Beru have put up a good fight, she ends up chasing Luke through the Dune Sea. Now, I was very explicit in my last review that if they had Luke see Reva, if they had him see the Force and lightsabers, then they would have made a huge, huge mistake. However, to be fair, they got their way around this. Luke believes that it was a Tusken Raider attacking him and chasing him. He never actually sees Reva's lightsaber, and just before Reva manages to catch him, he slips on a rock and kind of knocks himself out. I mean, kudos, they got around it, so fair enough. Now, talking of Reva, when it comes to her character arc, I think it works. Although I'm personally tired of redemption arcs that seemingly every bad character in Star Wars gets lately, I get this one. However, I just think the pacing is off for her character arc. It was only like a few hours ago that she was willing to murder Obi-Wan, and that she was willing to torture Princess Leia, a child, for information so she could get closer to Darth Vader. And I don't think there was any real showing of regret or serious internal conflict in any of these moments. If they had made that clearer throughout the show, that the things that she was doing was seriously troubling her and that she was having doubts, I think the ultimate turnaround of her not being able to kill Luke in the final moment would have been a lot more believable. But with that said, I also don't really understand the point of her hunting Luke. Like, what does it achieve for Reva killing this random boy in the middle of nowhere? 5 minutes ago, her number one intent was killing Darth Vader. Now she just wants to kill this kid to get back at Obi-Wan. There's no real correlation between these two events that make that progression feel natural. It feels kind of forced. But the overall character arc that they were trying to wrap up here makes sense. And this is where I believe that the pacing and the overall episode lengths were the problem, and not the general story that they were trying to tell with her. Anyway, we flip back to Obi-Wan and Vader, and at this point they're going toe-to-toe. Like I said, Obi-Wan's had his anime protagonist moment, and they're having a good fight, and Vader can see this. Obi-Wan is fighting for something, and he's starting to gain the upper hand, and he ultimately damages Vader's control panel, and he starts to take control of the fight, and then he slices through Darth Vader's helmet and wins. Now yes, this was a complete rip-off of Star Wars Rebels, but the general audience and the general Star Wars fans probably have never seen this, and I for one think that that scene in Rebels was one of the best Darth Vader character moments we've ever had, and so doing it again here feels kind of right, and they do it really, really well in live action. Also, credit where credit is due, because they have Vader talk to Obi-Wan in this moment, and they meld James Earl Jones with Hayden Christensen in a way that I thought was perfect. Every single piece of line delivery in this moment was perfectly balanced between the pain and the anguish that Hayden brings to Anakin, and the power and the intimidation of James Earl Jones as Darth Vader, and word for word, the balance was just exceptional. I also thought the dialogue here was brilliant, and I actually think it was a near perfect scene between Obi-Wan and Vader. This is probably one of the best scenes in the whole show. It's in this moment that we realise that Darth Vader doesn't hate Obi-Wan, and that Obi-Wan didn't fail Anakin. Darth Vader realises that he hates himself, and he failed himself. And I think this is such an important moment for Obi-Wan's character development too, because I think for the first time, Obi-Wan finally realises that it wasn't him that failed Anakin, it was Anakin that failed him. I also absolutely adored what they did with the lighting in this scene when they had Anakin talking about how Obi-Wan didn't fail him. The glow of Obi-Wan's lightsaber is essentially covering Vader in blue light, and then when Darth Vader starts to come back, this changes to where the glow of Vader's lightsaber starts to cover him in red light. They did this with Kylo Ren in The Force Awakens, they also did it with Anakin kind of in Attack of the Clones, and I think they did it really well here too. Obi-Wan then leaves Vader beaten, and he instantly gets the feeling that Luke is in trouble. Now, like I mentioned before, this is where the pacing issues could have been fixed if they didn't do this chop and changing between the two scenarios. Obi-Wan feels that Luke is in some serious danger, and within like 1 second he's all the way to Tatooine, and it's glaringly abrupt. If they had the fight scene between Darth Vader and Obi-Wan play out in full, and then Obi-Wan leave, and then have the scenario with Reva play out, and then a quick cut to Obi-Wan who feels that Luke is in danger, I think it would have made it smoother, and it's personally confusing to me how professional storytellers don't see this, but, you know, they're the ones getting paid the big bucks, so what can you do? So Obi-Wan gets to Tatooine, and then we can see Reva carrying Luke in her arms, and she's just walking him back to Lala's homestead, and they honestly think that she has killed him. Now, I think there's a nice little parallel here, because it's very similar to how Anakin was carrying the body of his mother, and how in that moment, that is where the descent of Anakin Skywalker began. And I kind of thought it was a reverse here, how Reva is carrying Luke in almost the exact same way, but this is where her redemption begins. Intentional or not, that's how I saw it. Anyway, this is where Obi-Wan then comforts Reva and tells her, you know, this is your choice. You can choose to let go of the dark side in a way that Darth Vader couldn't. You could choose to be better. And like I've said, I couldn't sit here and say that this was bad for her character arc or for her character development, because I don't think it is. And to be honest, if the leaks were true and she just went back to Darth Vader after Obi-Wan had let her go, then it would have been objectively awful. But it's not the case, those leaks weren't true, and it actually does help the story run along a lot healthier. But like I said, I don't feel she's earned this. I don't think there's been enough nuance in her character development to suggest that this redemption was coming, and that she was mindful of her actions, and that she was regretful in some of the bad things that she was doing. It makes a lot of sense, but I just don't think that it was executed well enough. And it also makes you wonder how everyone could just trust this Inquisitor to keep this boy a secret. I don't think she had earned that trust, but, you know, it is what it is. Obi-Wan then returns to Alderaan to give Leia her droid back, as she snuck it in his pocket for good luck, and I think they also adequately conclude Leia's story arc here too. Regardless of whether or not you liked the show, I don't think there's too much argument against that this episode does a good job of just concluding those story arcs in the right way. There wasn't any major plot threads that were left hanging like there were in the Book of Boba Fett. Maybe that's been lessons learned. But Leia goes from being a coddled kid who's constantly trying to escape the confines of her gilded cage, and by the end of it, she's come to terms with her responsibilities as a princess, and just knowing how she wants to do things better as she grows into that role, due to this real-life experience that she's had. There's also a nice little scene here between her and Obi-Wan that, again, I think adequately concludes their character dynamic, and I really do hope they don't include anything between them in any future stories. I think it should end here. Then Obi-Wan returns to Tatooine, and he has a similar thing with Owen and Luke. Owen takes the foot off the pedal of, you know, don't come anywhere near my child, stay away from us. But what's funny here is that I don't think this part of the episode was earned in any capacity. Owen has despised Obi-Wan for quite a while. This was made pretty clear in episode 1. And I think that Owen should actually continue to hate Obi-Wan, because Obi-Wan wasn't there when a Jedi hunter came hunting Luke. Now, if Obi-Wan had saved Luke, then this moment between him and Owen could have worked, but this is the only plot point where I feel they've actually really messed up in its conclusion, because it doesn't actually follow the character dynamic that was set between these two at the beginning of the show, and there's actually no natural progression for them to get to this point. This is literally a forced moment to introduce Obi-Wan to Luke Skywalker and for Obi-Wan to give Luke the Skyhopper, and then blah blah blah, A New Hope. Obi-Wan then leaves and he jumps on his Eopie and he walks off into the Dune Sea, and that's when he finally sees the ghost of Qui-Gon Jinn. It makes complete sense. Qui-Gon essentially explains to him that he's always been with him and that he just couldn't see him because he wasn't ready. And I loved seeing Liam Neeson back as a character. It's been 23 years, and even though this moment was short, I really enjoyed it, and I think this could lead into a good sequel series, one where it's honestly about Obi-Wan and more of a personal journey with the Force and with Qui-Gon's apparition. And I actually think it was kind of crazy how Liam Neeson literally doesn't look any different than he did 20 years ago as Qui-Gon. It was to the point where I looked at it and I was like, is that CGI? Have they de-aged him? But I don't think they did. I think he just looks the same. And then we roll the credits. That's the end of Obi-Wan Kenobi. All in all, if I'm to round up the show all together, I'm going to be perfectly honest and say that I do think the show really could have been better. Given that it was a character-driven show about trauma and overcoming failure, there just wasn't enough time to delve into those important themes. It's a Disney problem though. Every single Disney show that I've watched has had serious pacing problems, and it's because of the overall length of the episodes against the amount of episodes that were given, and I don't think this is going to change. Sadly though, I feel like Kenobi and the Book of Boba Fett have suffered severely, whereas The Mandalorian kind of got away with it. But I don't think Kenobi has been a brilliant show. I think there's been some really good moments. I think there's also been some really bad moments. And so for me, what we've gotten is just kind of a bang average Star Wars story and Star Wars show that doesn't really break any new ground or tell some incredible story that's going to be remembered for years to come. What will be remembered is the fact that what it did do is bring two of the most iconic prequel actors back into the roles of two of the most iconic Star Wars characters ever. And I think that is something that fans have wanted to see, and I think if that's what you're expecting from this show, then I think you're going to be very happy with it. And you know, in that regard, I'm also happy to have seen Ewan and Hayden come back for this show. But you know, in overall terms of story, the execution, I don't think it was as good as it could have been, but at the same time, there were moments that I did thoroughly enjoy. So like I say, it's down the middle for me. It's been an average show. I'd probably give it a 5 out of 10 if I was to give it a numbered score, or maybe a 6 out of 10 just for how much I loved Darth Vader in this show. I think they portrayed him really, really well. Anyway guys, that is it. If you enjoyed my review of Obi-Wan Kenobi, or you've been watching my reviews since the beginning, thank you so much for watching and thank you for the support. And if you did enjoy this video, don't forget to hit the like button because it helps me out a great deal. And if you haven't, perhaps consider subscribing to join the biggest growing Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic community on YouTube. I'll see you guys in the next video. But until then, may the Force be with you. Always.